Story 1. It was a chilly October evening when I arrived for my night shift at the local wall bomb store in the small town of Riverview. I had been working the graveyard shift for a few months now, ever since I dropped out of community college. The pay wasn't great, just a bit above minimum wage, but it was easy work, and I didn't mind the quiet solitude of the empty store late at night. As I clocked in a few minutes before midnight, I noticed I was scheduled as the only employee that night. That wasn't unusual for a Tuesday. The manager, Bill, gave me a quick nod before heading out the door, leaving me alone in the massive store. I went about my usual routine, restocking shelves in between helping the occasional late-night customer. Being so late, we never had more than 10 customers come in during my entire 8-hour shift. The store felt cavernous and lonely as I roamed the aisles, working on autopilot. My mind often wandered as I arranged boxes of cereal and canned goods. Around 2 a.m., I was organizing a shelf full of Chef Boyardee when I heard a loud crash from the next aisle over. I flinched, the sound piercing the perfect silence. Peering around the shelves, I saw a display of pasta sauce jars had toppled to the floor. Red marinara oozed across the white tiles. How did that happen? I wondered. There couldn't have been a customer over there, or I would have heard the automatic doors sliding open. I knew I needed to clean up the mess before someone slipped, but a creepy feeling crawled up my spine. Something felt off. I hurried over, keeping my eyes peeled for any movement in my periphery. As I bent to pick up the first shattered jar, a figure stepped around the end of the aisle. I jerked up to see a man staring at me silently. His appearance startled me. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with a long narrow face and dark uneven stubble along his jaw. His most striking feature were his lips. The upper one jutted out far beyond the lower, like a character from a cartoon. "Oh, hi," I stammered after a moment, unnerved by his sudden appearance and intense gaze. "Did you need help finding something?" "Where are the eggs?" he asked in a flat tone. His voice sounded slightly wet, as if his tongue was too big for his mouth. "Back wall of the store, next to the milk and dairy case," I replied, pointing helpfully. He continued to stare, and I shifted my weight, increasingly uncomfortable. "Thanks," he finally said before shuffling away slowly, his eyes on me the whole time, until he turned the corner. A shudder went through me. Every instinct said that man gave me bad vibes. I tried to shrug it off and finished cleaning out the spilled pasta sauce. The whole time, I kept dancing around, feeling like I was being watched. Eventually, I had to go to the storage room to get more sauce jars to restock the now empty shelf. As I pushed my cart down the back aisles, I spotted the creepy man again, this time lurking in the middle of the narrow hallway. My stride faltered for a second before I steeled myself and kept walking, fighting the urge to turn and run the other way. As I drew closer, he suddenly stepped right in front of my cart, blocking my path. "Hello again," he said in that unnerving monotone. "Funny running into you back here." Up close like this, I could see his eyes were an intense blue surrounded by red veins. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, and I couldn't help but lean away. Every nerve ending was on high alert. "What's your name?" he asked, invading my space. "How old are you? Do you go to school around here?" I took a small step back, bumping into my cart. I've got to get back to work," I stammered. "Excuse me." I tried to maneuver my cart around him, but he sidestepped with me, staying stubbornly in my path. "Wait, we're just having a friendly chat," he said, voice still eerily devoid of emotion. "No need to rush off. I just moved to Riverview, don't know anyone yet. Thought we could talk." He paused, and I said nothing, praying he would leave me alone. His tongue poked out to lick his lips, and I suppressed a shudder. "Do you go to a lot of parties?" he asked. "Got a girlfriend?" I didn't like his invasive questions or the hungry way his eyes roamed over me. Time to shut this down. "No offense, but I'm not interested in chatting," I said as firmly as I could manage. "I need to get back to work. Please let me pass." His expression darkened for a moment before smoothing back to neutral. Then he reached out and clasped my shoulder with a clammy hand. "Now don't be rude," he admonished. "We're just talking." My heart pounded as I broke away from his grasp. "Don't touch me," I said shakily. "Leave me alone, or I'll call security." I whirled my cart around and strode quickly towards the front of the store, pulse racing. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole way. Never had the store seemed so ominous. I felt like a scared rabbit being hunted. My plan was to park myself at the front registers and stay under the fluorescent lights until this creep left and I could call my manager. But as I nervously watched the aisles for any sign of him, he never appeared. I waited almost 30 minutes before deciding he must have slipped out unnoticed while I hid up front. There was no way I was chasing him down to pay for the eggs. I just wanted him gone. My bladder was protesting after all that time standing sentry, so I decided to risk a quick bathroom break now that he seemed to have left. After double-checking the men's restroom, I ducked across the hall into the women's. The restroom was a single room with 2 stalls. I took care of my business in the handicap stall for the extra space. As I sat there with my pants around my ankles, the door suddenly creaked open. My blood turned to ice. Someone just entered the bathroom. I held my breath, not daring to move a muscle. Please let it be a female customer. Please, the footfalls were too heavy. My intuition screamed at me to run, but I was literally caught with my pants down. Frozen in terror, I watched a man's shoe and the cuff of a grimy jeans appear under the door gap. He was standing right outside my stall, close enough that I could smell his putrid body odor. Then to my horror, he slowly sank down to his knees to peer through the door crack with one intense blue eye. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out, just a strangled squeak. We stared at each other for a nightmarish moment. Somehow my paralysis broke. I fumbled desperately for the box cutter in my pocket with one hand while yanking up my pants with the other. Gripping the box cutter, I leaned forward and slashed the little razor blade through the crack. "Ah!" he cried, reeling back. I slammed myself into the stall door, knocking him onto the dirty tiles. Practically falling over with my pants around my thighs, I unlocked the stall and toppled out, leaping over the man sprawled on the floor. He swiped for my leg, but only managed to grab my shoulders before I pulled free and fled for my life. Sprinting through the store, I raced for freedom, screaming. I burst through the automatic doors into the parking lot just as a police cruiser pulled up with lights flashing. Apparently, my frantic calls and texts to the manager had prompted him to send the cops to check on me. The officers responding to a call about a disturbed prowler ransacked the store, but found no one. The man had escaped. I could barely speak through my sobs as I described the terrifying encounter. The police took my statement and urged me to quit working nights. My manager apologized profusely for leaving me alone. He promised security cameras would be installed and a guard posted in the future, but I never returned to another shift. That was one job I was happy to quit. Story 2. It was a cold autumn night when I reluctantly agreed to cover the overnight shift at the 24-hour quick stop off Rural Route 6. My usual shift was weekday mornings, but Judy had called in sick that evening. Never thrilled about working graveyard, I begrudgingly changed into my uniform and headed in for the 10 p.m. 4M slog. The tiny gas station was situated right off a rural highway, surrounded by woods. We'd usually get 10 or 15 customers wandering in overnight, mostly truckers or late-night travelers. I tried to make the time pass quicker by chatting with the regulars, reading magazines, or playing games on my phone. Around 11 p.m., the front bells jingled as the door swung open. I glanced up absently, expecting to see one of our regular truckers. But I froze when I saw the young man who had entered. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with tangled dark hair hanging limply around his face. Baggy, filthy clothes hung off his wiry frame. But what unsettled me most was the way he was yelling and shouting gibberish. His eyes rolled back to stare at the ceiling. My heart went out to him. He was clearly disturbed, and I wondered if he might be disabled in some way. My own brother had special needs, so I felt an immediate empathy mixed with wariness. I tried speaking gently, but he only responded with more loud garbled sounds, ignoring me completely. He paced erratically around the store, knocking over displays and sending merchandise crashing to the floor. I winced at the destruction, but was afraid to confront him. After almost 15 agonizing minutes, I finally took a tentative step forward and offered him a bag of chips, motioning toward the door. Mercifully, he snatched the food and left without incident. I spent the next hour on edge, constantly checking the windows for any sign of his return. The bizarre encounter left me deeply unsettled. I couldn't shake the image of his piercing yet unseeing eyes. Hoping to refocus, I tried listening to music and reading a magazine. Around 1 a.m., the counter phone rang, making me jump. How odd for someone to call the store line at this hour. I answered cautiously. "Quick stop, how can I help you?" Instead of a voice, I was met with the same loud garbled yelling from earlier. My muscles seized in fear as I recognized the strange intonations of the young man. After a moment of paralyzing shock, I slammed down the phone. A sick feeling twisted my gut. Had he called from a payphone outside? Was this some kind of twisted prank? I spent the remainder of the shift on high alert, peering out into the darkness for any sign of the man. My imagination conjured him lurking behind every tree, but the night passed without incident. At 4 a.m. my relief Arnie arrived, allowing me to finally head home as dawn broke. Exhausted, I fell into bed as soon as I got in, comforted to have a locked door between me and the outside world. Within minutes, however, the bedside phone rang, my heart dropping. Who could be calling at this hour? I answered with dread, only to be met again by the familiar disturbing sounds from earlier. Nausea washed over me. How had he gotten my home number? The implications were terrifying. I slammed down the phone, pulse racing. Over the next few weeks, paranoia consumed me. I refused to work any more third shifts. At home, I kept curtains drawn and doors locked even in daylight. Strange noises woke me from restless sleep. I jumped at every creak and pop of the old house settling. One morning, I finally summoned the nerve to inspect the basement, which had always creeped me out. As soon as I flicked on the light, my blood turned to ice. Scattered across the concrete floor were papers from my home office, along with books and boxes ripped open. Venturing farther in, the beam of my flashlight landed on writing scrawled messily across the back wall. The address of the quick stop stared back in black Sharpie, along with my own home address. Bile rose in my throat. He had been here. Rummaging deeper, I recoiled in horror as my light illuminated a collection of knives neatly arranged atop a workbench, along with a large hunting knife. Blind terror propelled me upstairs. I didn't stop to grab anything except car keys and a coat. Peeling out of the driveway, I left the little house behind forever. To this day, I don't know what evil intent that man had planned. By some providence, he apparently changed his mind and vanished. But I'll never forget that nameless face or the unhinged madness in his eyes. Some evils in this world are beyond comprehension. Story 3. It was a cold, dreary night when I pulled into the parking lot of the 24-hour quick-stop gas station off Route 300 and one from my graveyard shift. I had been working here for a few months since graduating college, trying to pay down my massive student loans. The third shift hours were miserable. The overnight differential made it worthwhile. The little station was isolated, situated right off the highway, surrounded by woods. It maybe got a handful of customers stopping by for gas or snacks in the dead of night. Mostly truckers and travelers. I spent the majority of my 8 lonely hours reading magazines, playing games on my phone, and downing coffee to stay awake. I unlocked the front door and flipped on the lights, illuminating the dingy interior. As I walked behind the counter, the fluorescent bulbs flickered and hummed. This place had seen better days, but it paid the bills. Settling into the worn office chair, I propped my feet up and picked up the newspaper I had been working through for the past few nights. As I tried to focus on an article, I kept nodding off. The words blurred on the page. Normally, the quiet solitude of the night shift relaxed me, but tonight felt different. A sinister energy hung in the air. Around 1 a.m., I jerked awake at the sound of gravel crunching. Glancing out the smudged window, I spotted a beat-up red pickup pulling off the highway into the lot. It parked by the pumps. I watched a tall, shadowy figure emerge and shut the door. As I waited for him to start pumping gas, he just stood there, unmoving. I peered closer, but his features were obscured in darkness. His stillness creeped me out. What was he doing? After a few more minutes, my unease grew. I considered walking out to see if he needed help, though the idea made me nervous. Steeling myself, I looked up again, only to gasp in shock. The man had moved much closer to the front door without me noticing. He now loomed under the glow of the overhead lights, but his face was strangely obscured in shadow. I still couldn't make out any of his features. A prickle of fear ran down my spine. Something felt very wrong. Making a split decision, I leaped up to lock the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Maybe he would just leave if he knew he couldn't come inside. My heart pounded as I retreated behind the counter, sitting on the floor out of view of the windows. I didn't want him to see me. I texted a few friends, but all were asleep. I had never felt so alone. After a few minutes, I cautiously peered over the counter, then yelped in surprise. The man was now standing right outside the glass door, staring straight at me. I couldn't see his face, just a void of blackness. This had to be a prank. Some cruel joke, right? Terrified, I called 911 in a shaky whisper. The operator was skeptical about sending a patrol car for someone just standing outside. As I pleaded my case, a loud thump made me nearly drop the phone. Thump, thump, TUMP. The man was hurling himself against the door, violently trying to break in, letting out a strangled cry. I hunkered down, hugging my knees. Please send someone, I begged the operator, on the verge of tears. Over the line, I suddenly heard the rumble of that truck starting up, followed by the crunch of tires fleeing gravel. Peeking outside, I confirmed the parking lot was once again empty. The mysterious man was gone. Moments later, flashing patrol car lights appeared. I emerged on shaky legs to give my statement. The baffled deputy had searched the area, but found no trace of the truck or sinister man. He agreed something bizarre had happened, though without evidence of a crime, there was little he could do. After that haunting encounter, I turned in my 2 weeks' notice. The cops chalked it up to a prank, but I knew deep down whatever I had seen lurking outside that night wasn't human. No earthly explanation could erase the primal terror I felt. I moved to the city, far from that lonely little gas station by the woods. But sometimes at night, I still see that faceless void staring back at me from the shadows.